How utterly dysfunctional is the United States Supreme Court with the 6-3 right-wing majority led by Chief Justice John Roberts? Well, the New York Times reported that Justice John Roberts has been secretly enforcing secret non-disclosure agreements for everybody who works in connection with the Supreme Court, from the staff to the paralegals to the clerks to the assistants. Everybody who's involved now has to sign these NDAs, which say that if you in any way speak with journalists or leak information, there will be very serious legal ramifications. Interesting. Who's going to make the ruling on that? What if that gets appealed to the United States Supreme Court? What would happen then? And as I put in a social media post, it seems that if we had a functioning Supreme Court, one of the first things they would think is that NDAs that are put forward by the United States Supreme Court is unconstitutional. I mean, after all, this is the government. This is the public, right? This is something that we, the people, should have access to. They work for us. And look, I certainly understand the need and desire for privacy when it comes to, for example, the drafting of Supreme Court legal opinions and, the process where the drafts are exchanged and what goes on and what's being explained to the clerks. I understand that there is a deliberative process, privacy that is needed when it comes to how the sausage is made behind the scenes before an opinion is released. But the idea that it is not enough for the law clerks and the paralegals and the Supreme Court clerks, that their ethical responsibilities and the fact that it would be basically you'd be banished from the legal profession, there would be serious ramifications without an NDA. So for me, what this really speaks about is an overwhelming sense of paranoia in the Supreme Court. To me, it speaks to the fact that Justice John Roberts lacks the confidence that he has control over this court. And, it's just interesting because, lots of people are very critical of NDAs in general in private companies to shield certain types of conduct. And so the fact that the Supreme Court is having secret NDAs and the fact that they didn't tell the public about it, that there had to be a New York Times expose to figure it out and find it out, I don't know, it just seems like it's a further erosion of democracy and Article 3 and what the public should have access to. And, to me, this shouldn't be a passing story that's just like, oh, more corruption. I just think that it's important that we not accept a new normal where things like that exist. That's my view, but I want to speak with prominent lawyer who has clerked for two Supreme Court justices, Justice Marshall and Justice Kennedy, someone who's been the United States Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania, and somebody who's also been a prosecutor in Maine Justice, a lead prosecutor in Maine Justice. Let's bring in Harry Litman from the Talking Feds YouTube channel. Harry, we know that the Supreme Court has made some horrific rulings this term using their shadow docket so that they don't really commit to the merits of their ruling, but they'll pause the rigorous analysis of district court judges from all parties. I'm talking about Trump-appointed judges also, to Obama, to George W. Bush, to Reagan, to George H.W. Bush. District court judges doing their job, overwhelmingly ruling against Trump stuff because it's unlawful. Justice Roberts, usually the right-wing justices, swoop in, utilize their shadow docket, and then say, well, Donald Trump claims irreparable harm, and so thank you, District Court Judge, for your rigorous analysis or the mini trials that you've held or your 100-page rulings, but just based on the naked assertion of irreparable harm, we're just going to say the status quo is when Trump changed the law, not what the law existed before Donald Trump, or I shouldn't say change, violated the law we're just going to view what Trump did as the new status quo and then come back to us in a few years. Thanks for your analysis. And I think that people are pissed there, Harry. So you're now seeing NDAs at the Supreme Court, and you clerked at the Supreme Court, which for everybody out there, Harry's humble. Like the clerking at the Supreme Court is like getting drafted in the top 10 of the NBA draft, like for lawyers and law schools. It's like being drafted top 10 or top 12 in the NBA draft. That's how exclusive of a club it is. So people going into it, Harry, as clerks are not like, ooh, I'm going to leak it and screw over. Like, they're not going in with those intentions. And if they ever did that and they were caught, there's ramifications anyway that should be more serious than you're going to get sued via an NDA. The whole thing is crazy, Harry, but you've experienced clerking, and what do you make of this?
Yeah, I really have, and I think you're basically right. I kind of half agree with you. It's fun to have these discussions, Ben, when we diverge a little. It is a sign of the times that you would never have needed, and it's eye-popping that we're doing NDAs. But let me go back and say that this is just, it gets now, it infects the Supreme Court, the whole erosion of norms. When I clerked and there were some certain cases that were really sensitive. And if they're revealed, I mean, millions of dollars, if they're a business case, so much can happen. Plus, it can completely distort the deliberative process. So count me as one. But most of my colleagues would have been the same, who think it's deadly serious never to reveal things. There was a big case our term that seemed that everyone was focused on. I didn't tell, my spouse about it. It really matters. But that's what you do as a matter of norms. What has happened? The Dobbs opinion happened. And why did it happen? Because of the whole political polarization of the court that also goes to clerks, and the kind of Jets and Sharks atmosphere among the clerks has, we don't know who yet, but has, and we may probably never will, but it gave rise to someone who I think for political reasons, and you can frame this either way, did something that nobody, when I was clerking would ever have considered actually circulating a draft. And it was the real McCoy. So what's happened is the whole degradation of the process because of politics, because of polarization, because some members of the court as part of this feel like this is a really unfair process. We're getting rolled all the time. The same kinds of things you've mentioned. And that's led to it. And your basic point, by the way, is so right. If way back when someone I clerked with or I had revealed something like this and it had been traced to me, I better start, looking at jobs in bookstores or abroad. That is so absolutely, career ending. It's a complete, it's totally shameful. So that Roberts feels the need to do these things. And, you may well be right when it comes to it, even though it's a strict norm. Could you really be put in jail for, there'd be a First Amendment defense, maybe, but it's something that nobody ever would have thought of, and now they do. So there's this extra oomph of an NDA that probably many take umbrage at and say, of course, this would never happen. And the truth is, probably won't, if you're going to be like dropping drafts on reporters' doorsteps, I think you think you're going to get away with it anyway, or it's not going to change things that you've signed an NDA. But they are in such a less upstanding, credible, kind of professional institution now that the Chief Justice has to say, sign here before you enter the door. And that's just the politicization of the Supreme Court along with everybody else in Washington in the age of Trump.
Harry Litman, let me ask you this as well, though. In terms, who would enforce that NDA? I mean, through a judicial system, how would a district court judge? I mean, isn't everyone at every layer now conflicted, given that the Supreme Court oversees? Are they going to do a binding arbitration? You're going to have to go to a JAMS or a Judicate West or AAA arbitration with Justice John Roberts. Well, seriously, what?
Literally, what would happen, I think, is they would refer it for criminal proceedings to a willing department. Of course, depending on whose side the person's on. We're seeing now unbelievable criminal conduct being ignored if it's for the Trump side, and non-criminal conduct being criminalized. We just saw the Clintons now being forced to knuckle under and testify. Why is that? Because it never happened in history, by the way. No president ever has unwillingly testified. Only one has ever testified, period. And that's just because it's a skewed, rigged game. In the same way, yeah, that's right. I don't think they could on their own bring charges, but if they had good proof, they'd find and it was a lib, they'd find a willing accomplice in the DOJ. But your basic point, the addition to the professional shame and just train wreck that this would cause really, would be a small part of it, and that they even feel we need to get people to sign an NDA. You're probably right, ineffective, but also what a sign of the times. This is what it's come for. People feel incredibly fortunate, as you say, to clerk. Here I've been drafted in the, top of the NBA. I'm not going to screw this up. I'm going to, act in a solid way. I clerked for a liberal. I clerked for a conservative. I was scrupulous to play it straight with both, etc. You don't mess this up. But that's not the norms anymore at the U.S. Supreme Court. It's a sign of, what's happened generally in Washington with politics trumping, as it were, everything.
Everybody, make sure you subscribe to Harry Litman's YouTube channel. It's called Talking Feds. Subscribe to his Substack called Talking Feds, and subscribe to his podcast called Talking Feds. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Thanks, Harry.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.